Well, it's rarely immediate. Early in the course, there's often some disorientation that I notice with students. They're used to being told what the right answer is, and this course asks them to make decisions before they feel ready sometimes. And some interpret that as a lack of support, at least initially. And then that the turn for them does happen around our eighth session or so, about almost midterm, around the micro teaching experience. So when they're teaching something that they genuinely do know, and I mentioned some of those topics earlier, things like hip hop history or Tatriz, or which is the Palestinian embroidery, or baking science, or what we've had welding and disc golf, and having peers actually engage with it because of the intentional instructional decisions that they've made, that shifts something for them that I notice. They start to feel like people with knowledge worth sharing, and they are developing some emerging skills to facilitate others' learning. And so they're not just students performing competence for a grade. And that for me is a big shift for them. And I would say another place where I see that is the this I now believe assignment is, and that's at the end of their time in the course, is where I most clearly see the cumulative development over time. So reading what students wrote at the beginning of the course against what they write at the end, the specificity of their instructional decisions, the complexity of their thinking, and the way that they hold their uncertainties more honestly, they tend to be more reliable indicators that something has shifted in them. And so they're not just thinking differently about their teaching, they're starting to think a little bit differently about themselves as teachers. And that for me is what I would really want at the beginning of a foundations course as they are on the cusp of heading out into classrooms and starting to work with young people. And I think there's a lot of identity development in this work. That's what I notice more than anything else, is that they enter being really good college students usually, and they know how to play that game, but they haven't started thinking themselves in the identity of what it means to be a teacher and all of the different kind of thinking and work that goes into that, because it's just not transparent to them until they are sort of placed in a situation where they have to enact that work and make the inevitable mistakes, um, and feel the challenges of it and feel the productive struggle of it, that they start to get a sense of, oh, okay, so this is what it's like to be a teacher. Well, I think it changes who students understand themselves to be in the room, and that tends to matter quite a bit. So if I'm thinking about something like the course readings that we do every session, when those readings are framed as professional interpretation rather than covering readings, and students have some choice about how they engage with them, they bring a different quality of attention to those readings. I ask them, for example, to ask questions of the reading or push back against ideas in the readings or make connections to their own experience as students, or other kinds of ways that and then to choose the ideas that really resonated the most with them. And they seem to own the discussion space that they have differently than is if I just ask them to talk about the big ideas that you came up with. There's more willingness to push back, to make connections, and to bring their own experience to bear on the reading that they're doing. And the same, I would say, is true for micro teaching. When it's framed as a rehearsal for professional practice rather than a performance that has to be perfect out the gate, students take risks that they wouldn't otherwise take. And when the analysis that follows is framed as a revision to their design thinking rather than a correction of mistakes that they made, they engage with that more honestly, which is what is really important for the teaching career, because you have to treat yourself well when the instructional choices that you make don't go as you intend them to go. And that happens all of the time, but it's not something that I notice in students who have been successful college students are willing to accept sometimes, that it almost is sometimes really about the mistakes that you make that improve your role as a teacher. And I try to be really deliberate about the language that I'm using across the course. Calling something a rehearsal instead of a presentation, framing analysis as revision rather than correction. Those aren't just rhetorical moves that I'm using, but what they're trying to do is position students differently in relation to their own learning. And they're mirroring the ways that teaching actually works, where learning from your decisions is a constant and it's an ongoing professional responsibility. There's something also it feels important about whose knowledge gets to count. So when the course is making some space for hip hop history and Palestinian embroidery alongside the academic content, students who might otherwise feel peripheral to the profession start to see themselves as contributing to it. And they begin to understand and draw on those same funds of knowledge. This idea of cultural and community knowledge that students are bringing with them, they begin to understand that because they've experienced it, that it's actually a key instructional move for them as future elementary teachers. It's really affirming, but it's also pedagogically purposeful. They're learning an instructional approach that they're going to use with their own students and draw on their students' funds of knowledge while they've experienced that within the boundaries of this rehearsal space in this course. So by the end of the quarter, they have a more articulated sense of who they are as developing professionals. And it's not just what they know, but I think that's where their genuine professional confidence begins to develop is that identity formation as a developing teacher, as a new professional.